See what I'm saying? We want to care about justice, and we want to care less about security, because if we care about security first and don't keep saying we need to have justice and we clamor for justice, we will not have justice and we will not have security. And there is a famous statement from one of the founders, maybe Franklin, that says, "He who yields liberty for safety shall in the end have neither." And that's a truism that we need to consider today in light of the massacre of nearly 60 people from the long range high perch from a man firing automatic weapons, Mr. Paddock, and the investigation around that mass crime, which is an act of terror, and terrorism is a religious phenomenon. It is a phenomenon about making people think, act, and feel a certain way, which of course is what religion is. Religion is a worshiping of a god. And terrorism, particularly if you think of religiously motivated Muslim terrorism, is highly significant in that context, even though Islam, as it's called, or Mohammedanism, which is perhaps it's more correctly called, Mohammedanism, is a political ideology, a compulsory totalitarian political ideology, which has the markings of religion because it has a deity, and it has a prophet and other things, a means of salvation, a works righteousness, all of which are incumbent upon the adherents to obey and to effectively buy their salvation. Those, of course, like Muhammad Abdulaziz, who was involved in a paramilitary attack against federal installations here in Chattanooga, there are even greater rewards in terms of Sharia, and that would be because he died as a martyr to the faith of Muhammad. And I want to say something, unless you want to talk about something else. You, my listener, feel free to call me at 800-8949. That's 800-8949. The claims of terrorism are religious, and I think if we have a biblical analysis of it, we'll understand better how to defeat terrorism. We cannot defeat terrorism directly. Okay, it is a religious phenomenon. It is an act of worship, and it imposes an act of worship on the targets. Right, the victims of terrorism are to bow to the god, and the god is one that is mentioned repeatedly in the Christian scriptures, and that god is fear. Yes, fear of man is a god, and those in hell have not feared God, but they have feared men. They have feared men's opinions. They have feared men's lashes. They have feared men's disapproval, and want instead men's approval. And those in hell have not feared God, and they have not sought His approval. So that's why there is this distinction between the saved and the lost. Right, the wheat and the chaff, the sheep and the goats. The parables often are cited as setting up that very simple antithesis. There's a dichotomy between the white and the black. You know, Jerry Summers says, "David Tulis, you see things too much in black and white." Well, I'm kind of graced that way to perhaps oversimplify. But as he and I were talking about the Miranda problem in Chattanooga, where the police department is not Mirandizing people as required by the arrest procedures policy manual, 13 pages long on page 6. You're required as an officer to Mirandize a person the moment after arrest and not wait. And yet we have arrests all the time, especially in the field of transportation, where no one's Mirandized. High-profile cases, the Coonrod arrest, the Anson Melvin abuse case, there's no Miranda read at all. And so we know that it's a widespread problem disregarding what it's not a law. Miranda's not a law. It is a policy. And so since we don't live under laws anymore, we live under diktats of courts and opinions of men through court rulings. We could claim an interest in that insofar as it does tend to protect constitutionally protected God-given guarantees of men who are trying to live free and who are free in many ways, right? In many ways they're free, but the state is continually in almost every point of human existence making a claim against that liberty. And we call that, and has made it so routine that we don't even see it anymore. We don't see it anymore, and it's a matter of culture now that we don't have these liberties. And to be a person who defends his liberties or demands a show of cause or demands a warrant, these are rare people indeed. And that's because we are effectively the victims. We are under the judgment of security and are being denied justice. Now, I was having a chat a moment ago with a man, Marcus Price, who runs Chosen's Pressure Washing, and we didn't get since we want to talk about the Las Vegas massacre and have some connection with that news, which I know you're thinking a lot about, and everyone is waiting for the latest word about. We are here at Nooga Radio 92.7, and we have if there's anything that we need to interrupt my discourse for, we will certainly interrupt it in the way of breaking news on the Las Vegas massacre that has taken nearly 60 lives at last count, and injured some unto the point of death, up as more than 500 other innocent people who are the victims of terror. Now, Mr. Craig Paddock's ideas about why we don't know, and I'm going to just assume for the sake of discussion that the official narrative is true. Now, we have official narratives left and right which are just entirely fabricated. They are you might say tricks of the state trade, tricks of statecraft, and not genuine private crimes. They are in fact public crimes enacted by the state. We know there are many of them, but let's just assume for the moment that the official narrative that there's a single gunman, a 64-year-old retired accountant from Mesquite, who created, as the story says in the Times Free Press, made his own little sniper's perch up, fired through the window at people 500 yards away across a highway and into a bullets going down at 2,000 feet per second into a very crowded venue where there are nearly 25,000 people enjoying country music from a Nashville band. Terrorism is something that seeks to impose fear, and whether you're a gunman in a theater, whether you are a Muslim military man who's going to have your final vindication against the Caucasian heathens of the United States and shoot up a military base gathering, you have a goal of destroying the enemy, right? And in the destruction of the enemy, sacrificing yourself, you are willing to sacrifice yourself and make a statement. And private mass killers, especially when they're in high profile killings like the one that we have had Sunday night, the message is a little harder to understand. But in the end, that party does want everyone to bow down to the God of fear, and that is a deity that the Christian is denied any place in worship. The Christian, after all, lives a confident life, and he does not live in fear. And we have I have in front of me the history, Eusebius's Ecclesiastical History of the Popular Edition. And I've been reading, and I just have to briefly tell you about some of the people who died, just in very, very much in passing, who died as martyrs. They were the most courageous of people, dying because they refused to repent from the claims against them, refused to repent of God and the Lord Jesus, and to worship the idol, right? They refused to worship the idol, to make any sign that would be considered acceptable as a form of worship of an idol, which is to say nothing, right? An idol is simply nothing. There are no other gods. There's only one true God. And all those gods, whether in stone or in concepts such as the state, all those idols are simply nothing. They are impotent. They may have heads and ears and eyes, but those don't think, they don't see, they don't hear. And Blandina and the other martyrs simply refused. And one man, a nobleman, said he was taken to the faggots, which is to say the piles of wood around the stake in which he was going to be burned alive. They're called faggots. he was put the faggots were placed all around him, and then he said, "Well, where's the fire?" He demanded the fire that was going to extinguish his life. Only can a Christian live like that, and the fact that so many tens of thousands of people were martyred in the arenas amid the lions, being hanged upside down, being lit as human torches by fun-loving Roman procurators and the like, and saying nothing of it and thinking, well, what am I? I'm nothing. I'm nothing before God who saved me from my sins. This is, of course, the great act of worship that infuriated the heathens until finally their bloodlust just ran out and expired. And peace finally reigned all across Europe after 200 years of persecution under the hands of the Roman behemoth. So the Christian has examples. He has what the Bible calls a cloud of witnesses, men who suffered for the truth and who were unwilling to bend, unwilling to fear men. Think of St. Paul's story of his own travails as a former persecutor of the church, and now in the Gospels, in the Acts, let's say, making account of his troubles, whether woundings and stripes and burnings and isolations and shipwrecks, and being in the deep, tossed in the waves, all for the truth, right? The truth being that God is God and that He sent His Son to die for the sinner, and the sinner would be His people, right? He died for Israel, the old nation of Israel, now gone, expired, destroyed. The covenant transferred with the resurrection of the Lord Jesus to the church, right? The church is the new Israel. There is no Israel. There are no Jews anymore, right? There are no Jews. There is simply God's people, the chosen people. In fact, there is a pressure washing business in Chattanooga called Chosen's Pressure Washing, run by Marcus Price. And I said, well, why Chosen? And he said, well, I asked him, does God choose people? And he said, yes, God chooses people. He calls many and He chooses few. He chooses Jacob and He hates Esau, right? God makes that distinction between the sheep and the goats because God is sovereign and He is all gracious. The fact that He doesn't save everybody cannot be used to accuse Him, right? One cannot accuse God of not saving everybody because, after all, He is God. He does what He will. And the clay pot does not dare ask the potter, why have you made me for the feces and the other for the lips of the queen, right? That is not for anyone to ask. God does what He wants. And so we have a sovereign God and worthy of worship. And the martyrs, as Eusebius tells us in his magnificent history, which I have here for you to see backwards on Facebook and properly on YouTube at our Hot News Talk Radio channel. You see that book. It's a great history, very earnestly written. Now, I want to get to this question about fear. Terrorism is living in fear. Terrorism wants us to live in fear, and the Christian should not. And therefore, since the Christian is unwilling to live in fear, the Christian should be the first to say, no, we don't want the security state. We want justice, and we want policing. We want the courts to be in their proper place. Policing is something that the people do, right? It's always been that way. People in this country were always the police of their own cities and their own towns. What God does not want is ungodly fear, fear of men, fear of idols. Do not fear is the command that's most frequently used in the scriptures, even more than that of having faith. The importance of this command is emphasized by the fact that the list of those whose fate is in the lake of fire starts with the cowardly and the unbelieving, right? Why are you cowardly and why are you unbelieving? Well, because you have fear, and you have fear of men. The ungodly fear is directly related to lack of faith, right? If you don't have faith, you're going to have fear, especially of men. The motive for the Israelites to refuse to enter the land was fear in Numbers 14. And yet the author of Hebrews interprets it as a lack of faith. They didn't have faith. Jesus also contrasts faith to fear in several places. Thus, if the righteous shall live by faith in Habakkuk 2:44, Romans 1:17, and other verses, then the reprobate shall die by fear. And indeed, as Bojdar Maranov points out, our salvation is described as being freed from the bondage of fear. Fear is a religious sentiment. It is religious sentiment, and that's what a terrorist does. A terrorist, whether it's Craig Paddock or or Muhammad Abdulaziz. Of course, Muhammad Abdulaziz was not a terrorist. He was not a terrorist. He was a military operative, a paramilitary operative. But Muslim terrorists elsewhere and others, whether Boko Haram or the Shia or other Muslims who are acting in terrorism, they are rational men. They're not no. These are not madmen. Okay, they're not madmen. They have an essential point of worship in their argument. They're making an argument by blowing themselves up and blowing up innocent people. If they can create fear, they've won. Their victory is in making people the opposite of where they should be. Their victory is a negative victory against God. Men should not fear God and be confident in Him, confident in local economy in Chattanooga and Hamilton County and in the free market. No, we don't have that. Don't have confidence in the decentralized constabulary, which is to say the concealed carry permit holders and other gun carriers all around the county. There are thousands of them, some under permit, some as a matter of constitutional right. And the fear of God is a gospel message, right, in the Bible. The fear of man and the fear of fear, that having a fear, is also a gospel. It is a gospel of the ungodly. And the security state raises itself up upon that fear. That's why we have the security state. And I think it's important to understand what that whole attitude of security feeds from, right? It feeds on fear. And people, because they're afraid of future things that might happen to them, they willingly consent. They consent to all kinds of police abuse. They consent to warrantless searches. They consent to searches of their houses without there being anybody there, without there being the necessity of an immediate search without a warrant. You know, if a murderer, if a mass murderer is fleeing en foot and he runs into your front door, the police can enter your house without a warrant because there's a mass murderer in there, and they don't have time to get the judge's permission. So that is an exception to the warrant rule, right? But often there's that necessity doesn't exist. When I'm trying to think of the last massacre, when the marathon bomb story, which was a pretext, that was a pretext bombing. I don't think it really happened. When that happened, there was a training procedure for all the people of the Boston area, including in the Marlboro area, where my aunt was alive at the time. My Aunt Elaine, a former babysitter of the Kennedy family, my Aunt Elaine Tulis. Well, the training of the people of Boston was that we are going to enter your house without a warrant, and you just have to be glad about it. Be glad about it. And be thankful that our armed men are going to rush through your house without a warrant, pretend to look for somebody. We're not going to check every nook and cranny, but we're going to just make a show of abusing you. That is a training mechanism that the state uses against the people. And the people are glad for it. Why? Because they're afraid. They want security, and so they will yield their constitutional rights, which, as we're told by the hagiographers and those who talk about veterans and make much of military heroism, those men died for that liberty, right? Did they or didn't they? Well, if the soldiers who are buried at Chickamauga Battlefield died to preserve our liberties and freedoms, which they didn't, but let's just say that they did, because that's what everybody says. If they died for our liberties and constitutional protections and our republic, why would anybody grant a search without a warrant? Why would anybody do it? And the only person I think who's enunciated this argument lately is Carol Gaddy of Dunlap, the woman who refused the city government permission to search her house without a warrant or without probable cause. And she has been a victim of statutory oppression. The city in that case violated U.S. Code 42, 1980, the oppression provision. And those men up there, they deserve to lose all their assets. Even the judge in that town, in that county, Sequatchie County, he deserves to lose everything to her. She was roundly abused by official oppression by all those actors, Mayor Dwayne Land and Judge Rusty Stewart and the whole gang up there. Well, only she really makes that argument. The soldiers died for us, she says, I think mistakenly, but she says, and so I'm not going to yield my ground, and I'm not yielding to a search. If the soldiers died for your liberty, right, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the 16-year war that the Yankees have pursued to maintain the illusion of danger against us, well, then why would you yield to a search without a warrant? Why would you yield to all these other things in the way of regulation, licenses, ID checks, restrictions, and surveillance that you think are essential. Those things are illegal. They're simply illegal. But you know what? You, my listener, and we here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, we deserve them. Why do we deserve them? Well, it's a covenantal judgment. It is a judgment, I would say, by God against us. If we don't fear God, and if we don't stand on our rights given to us by God, defended, as we like to think, by these soldiers, given to us by our forebears who wrote these constitutions, and many of them believed in God, then we don't deserve to have these liberties. If we don't defend them and don't yearn for them, we're not going to have them. And here in Chattanooga, too few people care. And that's why the police can get away with all kinds of things. And that's why the district attorney, Neil Pinkston, can allow police abuse that has been brought to his attention and do nothing about it. These are crimes by officers. He does nothing about them. Why? Because of you, my listener, and then other people, another group of people, probably more important than the one in which you reside, and that would be Christian people. Christian people in Chattanooga don't yearn for justice. They yearn, like everybody else, for security. And yet they are the ones, more than any other group in Chattanooga at all, occupying and worshiping God on Sunday in 700 worship houses of worship in Chattanooga. They are the ones who don't care about justice. They don't call for judicial reform. They don't call for penal reform. I'm learning in my visits in local churches. And they share in the common fear of man, the fear of man, the fear of terror, the fear of the unknown. And because we cannot be confident in God, we cannot be confident in a decentralized peacekeeping, which is what, of course, the armed citizen idea is all about, and which is constitutional and still part of the American psyche, I would say. Because we can't believe in those things, we have to have surveillance. We have to have executive government. And that is the great danger. The great danger in Chattanooga, the great danger for the future of Tennessee, is executive government. That whether that be by Governor Haslam or Bob Corker and his federal people, and Senator Alexander and his federal people, they're all kind of the same. We think they represent us to them, the good people, but in fact, they represent it to us. They're the face of government, and somehow we think if we deal with them and shuffle them around, trading faces for offices, that things might be better, that we have a hope for the future. We'll have a good man in the governor's seat, and we'll have a good man in the Senate, maybe a good man in the presidency. We'll be better off for these things. And we're just leading ourselves astray. And I think that these are just conventional opinions that a lot of people have. I hope you, my listener, don't have them. And I hope you support what I'm doing. Do support me, David Tulis. I'm your host here at the David Tulis program. And subscribe to Nooganomics.com. That is the website for Man Who Matters. And it is the Minority Report. And because it's the Minority Report, I want you to think that it might be of use to you. And that is my earnest hope. That is why I'm here every day at 9 o'clock. Tell a friend about me and subscribe to Nooganomics.com. It's been a great honor to talk with you, my listener, here at 92.7. Kind of a great honor that you would give me just a few minutes every time. That's all I really hope for, a few minutes every day here at 9 o'clock. Tune in. We've got Sean Hannity this afternoon and Bloomberg Business News at 1 o'clock. Terrific reporting.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM 95.3 HD4.